in the forgotten hills of eastern Kentucky, where thick fog still drifts through the valleys like something out of a ghost story. There's a real-life mystery that's been confusing historians for nearly 200 years. Back in 1834, a preacher named Ezekiel Morrison showed up at a tiny, hidden Baptist church called Pine Hollow with his two 9-year-old twin daughters, Rebecca and Rachel. The place was so remote, most maps from back then didn't even bother to mark it. What happened over the 3 days they stayed there was written down in detail by the church's pastor, William Phillips. His old journal wasn't found until 1987. When the abandoned church was finally torn down, those journal entries tell a story that's so specific, so impossible to explain, that even modern experts have studied them and they still have no clue how two little kids could know the things they did. The Morrison twins didn't just make random guesses, they knew future events before they happened, exposed hidden family secrets, described people they'd never seen, and talked about tragedies from years before they were even born. And the creepiest part, every single thing they said turned out to be true. This channel isn't for everyone, it's for people who aren't afraid to explore the dark corners of history that still don't make sense. Before we go further into the Morrison mystery, hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear, most history books conveniently leave out. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because if it happened in Kentucky, maybe it happened somewhere near you, too. This story doesn't start with ghosts. It starts with something way more disturbing. Some believe there's a chance certain human minds can tap into knowledge in ways science still can't explain. Back in 1834, Kentucky was stuck somewhere between wildland and growing towns, with places like Pine Hollow hidden away in the Cumberland foothills, completely cut off from the rest of the world. That small settlement had been founded in 1818 by 3 families, who just wanted to escape the religious drama causing fights in the bigger towns. By the time the Morrisons showed up, Pine Hollow had barely 200 people living there. Almost everyone was connected by family, and their lives were strictly controlled by the Baptist faith that shaped everything they did. The heart of the community was a small wooden church they built themselves from the trees nearby. Pastor William Phillips, a smart, educated man who left his easy life in Lexington behind, was the one keeping track of all the births, deaths, weddings, and anything important that happened there. His habit of writing everything down would turn out to be the only reason we know what happened next. Ezekiel Morrison was a familiar face among the scattered churches deep in the Appalachian region. He was tall, rugged, with gray streaks in his hair that made him look older than 34, a sign of the hard life he'd lived. He traveled everywhere on foot with his twin daughters, carrying nothing but a worn leather bag that held his Bible, a few personal things, and a journal filled with his thoughts. His wife, Sarah, had died 9 years earlier, giving birth to the twins during a brutal winter storm that trapped them inside their cabin for weeks. The girls, Rebecca and Rachel, looked exactly alike, but their personalities couldn't have been more different. Rebecca, born just a few minutes before her sister, had the kind of energy that made people notice her right away. Her smile could light up a room, her laugh was real and loud, and she talked like someone way older than 9. Rachel, on the other hand, was quiet and always watching. She mostly stayed in her sister's shadow, but if you paid attention, you'd catch little things like how she would sometimes start saying something that Rebecca would finish, or how she answered questions meant for Rebecca before Rebecca could even open her mouth. What made the Morrison family stand out among traveling preachers was Ezekiel's reputation. Wherever they went, people whispered stories of how he somehow brought struggling churches back to life. There were always rumors following them. People talked about folks who had lost their faith suddenly returning to church, long-standing feuds between families being settled, and strange revivals that lasted for years after the Morrisons left. Some thought it was just Ezekiel's fiery sermons, but others noticed the real change always seemed to happen after quiet, private talks with the twins. The trip to Pine Hollow wasn't easy. Heavy fall rain had turned the mountain trails into a muddy mess, and Ezekiel had to carry Rachel for the last 5 miles when she came down with a fever. They made it right at sunset on November 15, 1834. Just as Pastor Phillips was finishing up evening prayers with the small group that showed up for midweek services. Later, Phillips wrote that when he first saw the family, what hit him wasn't just how exhausted they looked, it was like they were carrying a deeper, heavier kind of tiredness, like their souls were worn down. Ezekiel's clothes were worn and patched, his boots so thin from walking mountain trails they looked like they could fall apart any minute. The girls stayed close to him. Rachel still looked weak from her fever, and even Rebecca's usual spark seemed dulled by exhaustion. But there was something in their eyes, this sharpness, this awareness that didn't seem right for kids their age, that made Pastor Phillips strangely uneasy. The people of Pine Hollow had hosted plenty of traveling preachers over the years, but from the start, there was just something different about the Morrisons. That first night, as the family shared a simple meal with the Phillips family, Rebecca turned to the pastor's wife and asked about her garden. Specifically, she wanted to know if the roses by the east fence had recovered from the disease that almost wiped them out 3 summers ago. Mrs. Phillips froze, dropping her spoon. The rose blight had ruined her flower garden exactly 3 years earlier, but hardly anyone outside their tiny town even knew about it. When she asked Rebecca how she could possibly know that, the little girl just smiled and said she'd dreamed about roses while walking, and somehow knew Mrs. Phillips grew the prettiest ones in the whole county. Pastor Phillips wrote that moment down in his journal that same night. It would end up being just the first of many strange things that made people in Pine Hollow question everything they thought they understood about the world. The next morning, the sky was gray and cold. A bitter wind shook the windows of the small cabin where the Morrison family was staying. As usual, Pastor Phillips was up before dawn, getting ready to prepare his sermon for the day. He found Ezekiel already awake, sitting beside the fading glow of the fire. His Bible was open on his lap, but his eyes were staring off into the distance with a worried look. The girls had strange dreams last night, Ezekiel explained quietly when Phillips asked what was bothering him. They usually dream about the towns we visit, but these dreams were different, darker. Before Phillips could say anything, Rebecca appeared in the doorway. Her hair was messy from sleep, but her eyes were wide and alert. Pastor Phillips, she said in her small, clear voice, in your church, under the 3rd floorboard from the altar, there's something hidden that shouldn't be there. Rachel dreamed about it, and I dreamed about why it's hidden. A cold feeling ran through the pastor's chest that had nothing to do with the morning chill. She was right. He had hidden something under that exact floorboard or bottle of whiskey. A weakness he'd been fighting for months. No one knew about it. 3 months earlier, during a rough patch, he'd told himself it was better to keep the temptation close, better to test his strength daily, rather than get rid of it completely. It was a secret that filled him with shame, one he'd only ever whispered to God in his prayers. What exactly did you dream, child? Phillips asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Rachel stepped quietly from behind her sister, moving with that strange, quiet grace she always had. The bottle is brown, she said softly, and it's wrapped in a piece of cloth. A blanket, the one that used to be for your baby, a blue blanket. Phillips sank into his chair like his legs just gave out. The cloth was exactly what they described, a piece of a baby blanket, the same blanket that would have belonged to the son he and his wife lost as an infant 5 years ago. He had wrapped the bottle in it, a twisted reminder of his failures, of the father who couldn't save his child, of the pastor who couldn't beat his own demons. Ezekiel saw the look on his face and gave him this tired, understanding expression like he'd seen this happen before. Too many times to count. It started when they were really young, Ezekiel said quietly. At first, I thought it was just that thing little kids do, sensing stuff adults miss. But as they got older, their feelings got way more detailed, way harder to explain. That Sunday's service would stick with every person in Pine Hollow for the rest of their lives. Ezekiel's sermon was strong, sure, but nothing unheard of for a traveling preacher. It was what happened after church that nobody could forget. As people were heading out, Rebecca walked up to Samuel Turner, a well-off farmer, respected, always generous to the church. She looked right up at him with those bright, innocent blue eyes and said, "Mr. Turner, the money you've been taking from the church collection, it's not really stealing if you plan to put it back, right? Papa says, God forgives people who admit what they've done." Turner's face turned pale in an instant. For 6 months, he'd been slipping small amounts from the offering plate to pay off debts from a bad investment in Louisville. He always told himself he'd pay it back, but the guilt had been eating away at him for months. Before Turner could even open his mouth, Rachel stepped up beside her sister and turned to Martha Whitfield, the older widow. Everyone in the church looked to as the unofficial judge of right and wrong. "Mrs. Whitfield, your husband didn't really die in that farming accident, did he? He's still alive somewhere. That's why you hide the letters." The old woman swayed like she might pass out. It was true. Her husband had left her and their kids 15 years ago, took all their savings, and disappeared in the middle of the night. To protect her reputation and her kids' future in this tight-knit town, she'd lied. Told everyone he'd died in an accident. The letters Rachel mentioned, they were real too. Faded notes that still showed up every now and then, sent from Missouri, full of apologies and stories about his new life. She'd never told anyone about those letters. The twins moved quietly through the crowd, stopping here and there, their voices soft but their words cutting deep. To Dr. Hayes, they casually mentioned the patients who'd died under his care, people he could have saved if he actually had the medical training he claimed. To the Miller family, they calmly brought up the son they kept hidden in the attic, the boy with a simple mind they were too ashamed to let the neighbors see. To young Thomas Brett, they described in perfect detail his secret meetings with Elizabeth Carter, the married woman whose husband was always away on business. Each truth was delivered with total innocence, like the girls were just making small talk about the weather, but every word was so dead on, so impossible to explain, that the whole room froze, trapped between shock, fear, and something close to awe. Pastor Phillips stood frozen, watching in horrified disbelief as his neat, quiet community was completely unraveled by two 9-year-old girls who spoke of secrets that should have been known only to God. But it was Rebecca's final words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. She walked calmly to the front of the church, stopped at the altar, and placed her small hand on the wooden cross, the one carved by the church's founders when Pine Hollow first came to be. "This is supposed to be sacred ground," she said, her voice ringing through the dead silence of the room. "But it's been stained by what happened here before." Then she looked straight at Pastor Phillips. "The Whitman family didn't die in a house fire, did they, Pastor? They died right here, in this very room. And some of you know exactly why." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the wind outside seemed to stop, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for someone to speak, waiting for the truth. The name Whitman hit the congregation like a slap. Phillips, pale as a ghost, gripped the pulpit so hard his knuckles turned white. The Whitman tragedy was the town's deepest scar, a secret buried under 16 years of quiet denial. Back in 1818, when Pine Hollow was barely 50 people trying to survive in the wild, the Whitmans were one of the town's most respected families. Jacob Whitman worked as the blacksmith and was basically the leader before the town was even organized. His wife, Mary, was famous for her herbal remedies and her gentle touch with sick neighbors and newborn babies. Their twin daughters, Hope and Faith, were the pride of Pine Hollow, beautiful, bright 9-year-olds who sang in the church choir and helped their mom care for the sick. The story everyone told, the one written in the church records, was that the Whitman family died in a tragic house fire during a brutal winter storm. Their bodies were found in what was left of their home, and they were buried in the church cemetery with the proper ceremony. The town mourned, rebuilt, and did what frontier towns always had to do, move on when tragedy hit. But what Rebecca said hinted at something completely different, something the older folks in the room had quietly prayed would stay buried forever. Elder Thompson, one of the oldest living founders of Pine Hollow, slowly stood from his seat, his joints stiff with arthritis, but his voice strong from a lifetime of carrying the town's burdens. "Child," he said, carefully choosing his words, "you speak of things that happened long before you were born, in places you've never been. How could you possibly know any of this?" Rebecca turned, her clear blue eyes locked onto his. There was something in her stare too old for her face that sent a chill through the room. Faith Whitman had a birthmark on her left shoulder, she said softly. Hope had one on her right ankle. Faith always carried the little wooden doll their father carved, and Hope wore a silver locket with their mother's hair inside when they died. Faith was wearing her blue Sunday dress. Hope was still in her nightgown, because she had a fever. A wave of quiet gasps swept through the older members of the church. The details were impossible for a stranger to know, but every word was true. Elder Thompson's wife gripped his arm, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Then Rachel spoke, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Night they died. It wasn't a house fire," she said. "They came here, to this church, looking for a safe place, because someone was after them. They hid behind the altar. But they were found anyway." The church was so quiet now, even the sound of breathing felt unnaturally loud. Pastor Phillips couldn't stop the memories creeping into his mind. Little pieces of conversations over the years. The whispers that always stopped when he walked into a room. The strange looks between the older folks whenever certain topics came up, the way some families always left flowers, not on a marked grave, but at an empty patch of grass in the cemetery. Suddenly, Samuel Turner, still rattled from being called out earlier, shot to his feet. "This is crazy," he said, but his voice cracked halfway through. "These kids are making stuff up, trying to scare us. There's no way they could know any of this." But even as he spoke, others in the room started remembering things. Strange things. Mrs. Carter, Elizabeth's mother-in-law, whispered about those dark stains that kept showing up on the church floor years later. No matter how hard they scrubbed, they never came out. Old Benjamin Foster mentioned the weird sounds late at night. Soft crying, echoing through the empty church. Everyone always blamed the wind rattling the old wooden boards. Even Dr. Hayes, embarrassed about being exposed as unqualified earlier, couldn't stay quiet. "I always wondered about the church foundation," he said carefully. 3 years ago, when I helped fix the east wall, we found, well, what looked like pieces of bone mixed into the mortar." The weight of his words dropped over the room like a stone. If the Whitman family didn't die in their house, if they were killed inside the church, and their bodies were hidden in the very walls, that meant every prayer, every hymn, every quiet moment of worship had happened standing right over their unmarked graves. If the Whitman family really had died inside the church, if their bodies were hidden in its very walls, then every Sunday service, every prayer, every moment of worship had happened right on top of their unmarked graves. Ezekiel Morrison had been standing silently through all of it. His weathered face showed concern, but not surprise. He'd seen this happen before. Watched as his daughter's impossible knowledge pulled buried secrets out into the open, tore apart the lies towns worked so hard to protect. "Mr. Morrison," Pastor Phillips finally spoke, his voice shaky. "How do your girls know these things? What kind of gift lets them see all this?" Ezekiel stayed quiet for a long time. His eyes drifted over the faces of the shaken congregation before he answered. "I've been asking myself that question every day for years," he admitted softly. "Their mother, Sarah, she always said she had the sight, could sense things others couldn't. But what the girls have, it's more than anything Sarah ever showed. They dream about places they've never seen, people they've never met. They know details about things that happened before they were even born." His eyes softened as he looked at his daughters, love and sadness mixing in his expression. "At first, I thought it was a blessing, a gift from God, something that could help me bring comfort to hurting people." He paused, his voice lower now. "But over time, I've started to wonder if it's something else entirely. The knowledge they carry, it comes with a price. They carry everyone's secrets, everyone's pain. They know things no kid should ever have to know, almost like they'd been waiting for him to say that. The twins walked quietly to the front of the church, for the first time since they arrived. They just looked like kids. Small, tired, lost in a world way too complicated for them. "We don't get to choose what we see," Rebecca said, her voice soft now, her earlier confidence gone, replaced by an exhaustion way too old for her young face. "The dreams come whether we want them to or not. We see what was, what is, and sometimes what's coming," Rachel said softly, her hand slipping into her sister's, the Whitman sisters. "They come to us in our dreams sometimes. They want people to know the truth. What really happened to them. They just want to be remembered the right way." The church went completely still again. But this time, it wasn't just fear or shock in the air. People looked conflicted. Some faces full of doubt, others full of fear, but a few looked hopeful. Like maybe death wasn't really the end. Like maybe there was more. Something they'd never dared believe. Pastor Philip stood there, his heart racing. He knew this moment, this decision, would change everything about his life from here on out. He could dismiss everything, say it was childish nonsense, or worse, some kind of trick. Keep Pine Hollow's little world safe and untouched, or he could chase the truth, wherever it led, even if it meant tearing down the very foundation the town was built on. Either way, there'd be consequences, bigger than any of them could see coming. That night, as the sun disappeared and shadows crept over Pine Hollow's crooked streets, Pastor Phillips sat alone, trying to pray, but the words wouldn't come. The girls' words, the things they knew. It had rattled him, not just because they were impossible, but because deep down, they'd forced him to face questions he'd been running from for years. When he came to Pine Hollow 5 years ago, it was supposed to be a fresh start, a quiet place to serve God, far from the drama and arguments of the big churches back in Kentucky's cities. But even then, the old church records never sat right with him. His predecessor, Pastor Moriah Hayes, had kept neat, detailed notes, births, deaths, everything important. But the earliest years, there were gaps, big, obvious gaps, like entire parts of the town's story had been wiped clean. The winter of 1818 had always seemed weirdly empty when it came to details. The records talked about the usual stuff, brutal weather, food running low, some older folks passing away, but the tragedy with the Whitman family, it barely got a mention. Jacob Whitman, his wife Mary, and their twin daughters Hope and Faith, all supposedly died in a house fire on the night of December 21st. Their bodies were buried with what the records called appropriate Christian ceremony. But what always bugged Pastor Phillips was how little was written about it. Pastor Hayes had been obsessive with his record keeping. He wrote down every tiny thing, arguments over livestock, someone's fence breaking, even illnesses that turned out to be nothing, but an entire family dying, a family as important as the Whitmans. Barely a paragraph. Something didn't add up. Determined to understand what the Morrison twins had stirred up, Phillips started digging through the church's old records again. This time, really looking, tucked away under years of forgotten papers. He found it, a small, leather-bound journal, one he'd never seen before. The pages were old, water-stained, fragile, but the handwriting, definitely Pastor Hayes's. What Phillips read that night, alone by candlelight, completely changed how he saw Pine Hollow. The journal showed Hayes had been deeply disturbed by what really happened to the Whitmans. His private notes hinted that Jacob Whitman had uncovered something ugly about certain people in the town, bad enough that he demanded they confess and fix it. The notes didn't spell it out clearly, but it sounded like way more than money problems, something darker. Something worth killing to keep quiet. On the night of December 20th, 1818, Jacob Whitman had apparently gone straight to the town leaders and called them out. The meeting lasted way past midnight. Pastor Hayes wrote about shouting accusations of stealing and corruption, and threats. Serious threats. the kind that could destroy the reputations of some of Pine Hollow's most respected families. The final journal entry, dated December 22nd, was the part that sent a chill down Philip's spine. May the Lord forgive us for what we did. Jacob and his family came to the church looking for protection, but they weren't alone. I heard the children crying, and then nothing. When the sun rose, we found them, just as they had been left. Elder Thompson and the others insisted this was the only way. They said the truth would tear the whole town apart. I agreed to their plan. God have mercy on my soul. Philip set the journal down, his hand shaking. The truth hit him hard. The Whitmans didn't die in a house fire. They were murdered in the church. And the town's leaders had covered it up for 16 years. But how? How could the Morrison twins know things like this? How could they describe the kids' clothes, their belongings, even what they looked like, with creepy, impossible detail? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. When he opened it, there was Rebecca, standing under the moonlight, her simple dress glowing faintly, her hair neatly braided, like she'd been up, waiting for this. Pastor Phillips, she said, her voice small but sure. You found Pastor Hayes's journal, didn't you? The one hidden behind the loose stone in the foundation? Phillips just stared at her. Stunned, she was right. That's exactly where he'd found it. After following a tiny draft in the wall that led him straight to the loose stone. How did you know where to tell me to look? He finally asked. Faith showed me, Rebecca said casually. Like it was no big deal. She said Pastor Hayes was a good man, but people made him do bad things. She wanted someone to finally tell the truth. Hearing her say she got messages from a child who'd been dead for years sent a chill down Philip's spine. Rebecca? He asked carefully. What exactly do you see when you have these dreams? Her face grew serious, and for a second, Phillips could see the weight this little girl was carrying. We see everything, she replied simply. Not just what happened, but why it happened. The men who killed the Whitman family, they didn't mean for it to go that far. Then, what did they want? Phillips pressed, needing to understand. Rebecca's eyes drifted past him, toward the cabin window. Through it, Phillips could see Rachel sitting by the glass, staring out at the church cemetery. The money, Rebecca said quietly. The money to build the church. It didn't come from donations. Some of it was stolen, from travelers who passed through the valley. Phillips's heart sank as the pieces began clicking into place. He remembered the old stories how, in Pine Hollow's early days, people traveling through the mountains would just disappear. Everyone blamed the wild animals, or the harsh winters, or accidents. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? Jacob found out, Rebecca continued, her voice flat, like it was just a fact. When he was asked to make horseshoes for horses that belonged to dead men. It all made a terrible kind of sense. Now, if Jacob had found proof that some travelers had been murdered for their money, and if that money had been used to build the church, then everything Phillips believed in, everything he thought was sacred, was tainted. The church was built with blood money, Rebecca finished. That's why faith and hope can't rest. Their blood was spilled on ground that was already cursed. Phillips felt sick. The place where he'd preached, prayed, asked for forgiveness, had been built on death and lies. But even through his horror, the logical part of his brain kicked in. How could he prove any of this? How was he supposed to tell the difference between real supernatural knowledge and some elaborate trick? That answer came quicker than he expected, and from someone who shattered any logical explanation he had been building in his head. Next morning, Pine Hollow got an unexpected visitor. As the Morrison family packed their things, ready to finally leave after extending their stay because of all the drama from Sunday, a lone rider appeared, coming down the eastern trail. Man was in his 50s, dressed sharp, like someone from the city, with the confident look of a guy used to being listened to. He introduced himself to Pastor Phillips as Thomas Brennan, a lawyer from Lexington. There to dig up information about Pine Hollow's earliest days. I represent the estate of Marcus Webb, Brennan explained, sipping the coffee Phillips offered him. Mr. Webb recently passed away in Louisville. In his belongings, we found some papers suggesting he had business ties here, back when this place was just getting started. I'm tracking down some money. Funds that seem to have gone missing. Phillips felt his stomach twist. Marcus Webb. That name was in Pastor Hayes's hidden journal. The same journal that revealed everything about the Whitman family. Webb was one of the travelers who'd disappeared in these hills. Way back in 1818 or 1819, according to Hayes's notes, Webb had been carrying a lot of cash meant for land deals in Tennessee. Before Phillips could even think of what to say, Rebecca was suddenly standing at his side. Her timing, as always, was unsettlingly perfect. She looked right up at Brennan, curious but calm. "Mr. Webb had a gold watch," she said casually. "His initials were inside the cover. It had a crack on the glass. He dropped it when he fell off his horse." Brennan froze. His face went pale, his professional mask slipping for the first time. "How do you even know about Marcus Webb's watch?" Brennan demanded, his voice sharp with disbelief. "The only person who ever knew that detail was his brother. It was in a private letter." Rachel appeared beside Rebecca so quietly it was like she just materialized there. Her voice was soft, but steady. "The watch is buried behind the church," she said. "With his money bag and the bridle from his horse. Elder Thompson hid them after what happened on the trail." The words hit Pastor Phillips like a punch to the chest. If what the twins were saying was true, if Webb's belongings were buried behind the church, it meant these girls knew things no normal person could possibly know. It also meant the rumors. The dark whispers about Pine Hollow's beginnings weren't just stories. They were real. Brennan practically jumped off his horse, his expression shifting from shock to determination. "I want that area dug up. Now," he ordered. "If the girls are right, this is evidence of robbery and murder." Elder Thompson stepped forward, slow but steady. At 73, he was the last of Pine Hollow's original leaders still alive. His lined face held both stubbornness and something close to regret. "You're poking your nose into things you don't understand," Thompson warned, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "This town was built by people who did what they had to do to survive out here." "Survival doesn't excuse murder," Brennan shot back, eyes hard. "If what they're saying is true, this whole town was founded on crime." Rebecca turned her eyes on Elder Thompson. That same unsettling stare, like she could see inside his head. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "the nightmares stopped after that first year, didn't they?" Rebecca's voice was steady, her eyes locked on Elder Thompson. "You told yourself it meant God had forgiven you." Thompson's face cracked, his tough exterior falling apart right there. His voice was barely a whisper. "There's no way you could know that. No one knows about the dreams. The ones where Marcus Webb begs me to let him go." Rachel's soft voice cut through the quiet, her words landing like a punch. "About how you see his face every single night before you fall asleep." The old man collapsed onto a tree stump like his legs had simply given up. His voice shook with the weight of memory. "It wasn't supposed to go that way," he admitted, tears filling his eyes. We just wanted the money. We were starving. Our kids were sick. Winter was coming." But Webb fought back. His confession hung in the air like smoke from a funeral. Pastor Phillips stood frozen, his heart pounding as he realized everything he thought he knew about his church, his neighbors, even his faith was crumbling. Ezekiel Morrison finally broke his silence, his voice calm but heavy. "The truth always comes up eventually," he said. "My girls, they don't choose what they tell people. The truth finds them." Brennan didn't waste a second. He rallied the townsfolk and grabbed shovels. Within hours, a group gathered behind the church, following the twins' directions to the exact spot. Phillips watched them dig, his stomach twisted in knots. With every pile of dirt, they got closer to the kind of proof that could rip Pine Hollow apart for good. It didn't take long. About 3 feet down, the shovel hit something hard. They cleared the dirt away carefully, revealing a gold pocket watch, tarnished but intact, its crystal cracked, just like Rebecca said, inside the cover. The engraved initials, MW. Next to the watch lay a worn leather bag. The money inside was long gone, but its presence said enough. The horse's bridle was falling apart, but it was still clear what it had been. Brennan examined the items one by one with the calm focus of a guy who clearly built legal cases for a living. "This matches exactly," he said, holding up the gold watch, the crack in the glass, the engraving, even that weird chain link. All of it's just like Marcus Webb's brother described in his letters. But it wasn't the watch that sealed the truth. It was Elder Thompson's face. The old man looked at the objects like they were ghosts from his past. His lips moved silently, maybe a prayer, maybe a confession. "There were more," he finally whispered, voice shaking. "Webb wasn't the first, and he wasn't the last." His words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. "The trail through these mountains, it was perfect," he went on, eyes distant. "Travelers passed through all the time, usually alone, often carrying cash for land or business." The full picture was coming together now. And it was ugly. Pine Hollow wasn't built on faith and hard work like they always bragged about. It was built on robbery, on murder for years. And still, Pastor Phillips couldn't shake the bigger questions clawing at his mind. How did the Morrison twins know this? The victims' names, the hidden evidence, crimes that happened years before they were even born, the truth. It was scarier than any logical explanation, and it made Phillips face something he never thought possible. Maybe death wasn't really the end after all. As the sun dipped behind the hills around Pine Hollow, shadows stretched long across the dig site and the old cemetery beyond. Pastor Phillips stood frozen, realizing his town had hit a breaking point. 16 years of secrets were finally clawing their way to the surface. But with the truth came questions, hard ones, about justice, about forgiveness, about what was real and what wasn't. The Morrison twins stood side by side in the fading light, their small silhouettes framed against the church. A church built with stolen money and baptized in innocent blood. They tilted their heads, listening to something only they could hear. Their eyes drifted toward the cemetery, where so many secrets still slept beneath the soil. Tomorrow would bring consequences, but tonight belonged to the dead, finally speaking through to 9-year-olds who knew way more than they should. Morning came, cold and gray, but with it, a whole new storm hit Pine Hollow. Word had spread like wildfire. By midday, county officials were everywhere. Solicitor Brennan hadn't wasted a second getting the law involved. Now, the town was crawling with authority, a sheriff, a hard-faced territorial judge, even 2 federal marshals. They'd been chasing reports of missing travelers in these mountains for years. Judge Harrison, all silver hair and icy eyes, set up his temporary court inside the church itself. Phillips couldn't help but think it was fitting. A trial inside those blood-stained walls. The building practically begged for it. The whole town had been called in for what was basically part trial, part final reckoning. Elder Thompson looked worse than ever, the weight of his confessions practically crushing him. He sat up front, pale and sunken, flanked by 2 other old-timers who'd been in charge back when it all went down, but all eyes were on the Morrison twins. Judge Harrison had rolled into town thinking the idea of psychic kids was ridiculous, but after yesterday's discoveries, even he had to rethink things. He'd spent the morning questioning the girls separately, grilling them, trying to figure out how they knew things that happened before they were even born. "Rebecca Morrison," the judge called out, his voice filling the church. "Tell this court exactly how you knew where Marcus Webb's stuff was buried." Rebecca stood there, tiny and quiet, under the crushing weight of every stare in the room. "Faith Whitman told me," she said calmly. "In my dream, she told me the same men who killed her family killed those travelers too. She wants everyone to know, and you, Rachel Morrison." The judge pressed. "How do you know details about things that happened years ago?" Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. "The dreams come to both of us. We see it all. Like we're right there. We see their fear, hear their last words, feel what they felt." Judge Harrison leaned in, sharp eyes narrowing. So you're saying you talked to the dead? Before either girl could answer, Ezekiel Morrison stood. Your Honor, my daughters never claimed to understand it. They just tell what they experience. I've seen it happen in town after town. They know things they shouldn't. Things they couldn't learn by normal means. Sheriff Mackenzie, a no-nonsense guy, more interested in facts than ghost stories, looked straight at the twins. Can you tell us how many people were killed along these mountain trails? Rebecca and Rachel traded one of those silent, knowing looks before Rebecca spoke. 11 men over 3 years. Most were traveling alone, carrying money for land or business deals. She said it so casually that a wave of uneasy whispers rippled through the church. Rachel picked it up from there. They're unsettling. Back and forth as smooth as ever. One of them was a preacher, like Papa, but he had gold coins hidden inside his saddle. The way she said it sent a chill down the room. Sheriff Mackenzie pulled a worn notebook from his coat pocket, flipping through the pages. His face went pale as he found what he was looking for. Samuel Collins, preacher, disappeared on this trail, September of 1819, he confirmed, his voice tight. And the horse? A bay mare, with a white star. That's exactly what's recorded. But what happened next shook the whole place to its core. Elder Thompson, frail and shaking, forced himself to stand. Your Honor, he croaked, his voice breaking under the weight of it all. I can't carry this secret any longer. The girls, they're telling the truth. His words landed like a blow, silencing the entire church. The wind rattled the boards, a hawk cried somewhere above, and nobody dared to move. There's more. Thompson confessed, his old face streaked with tears. Worse than the murders, Jacob Whitman wasn't just some nosy neighbor. He was my brother. I trusted him, Thompson said, his voice cracking. I thought blood ties would keep him quiet. But Jacob cared more about doing what was right than protecting us. Pastor Phillips felt like the floor was shifting beneath him. As the old man's confession poured out, Jacob threatened to go to Lexington. Thompson continued, looking like the weight of it all might crush him. He wanted the families of those men compensated. He was gonna tell the authorities everything. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. We couldn't let that happen. Too many people depended on Pine Hollow. Depended on what we built here. Thompson's words hung heavy in the air as he kept going, his face pale and shaking. December 21st, 1818, we followed Jacob and his family to the church. He thought holy ground would protect them. His eyes filled with regret, but we were desperate and scared. Rebecca, standing nearby, suddenly spoke, her voice low but steady. Tell them about the babies. The color drained from Thompson's face completely. Dear God, he choked. How could you possibly know about that? Judge Harrison leaned forward, his face hard. What babies? Speak up, Mary Whitman. She was pregnant, Thompson admitted, like each word physically hurt to say. 8 months along. With twins, the doctor said. Maybe they could have lived if we'd gotten help. But his voice broke. Rachel stepped up beside her sister, her quiet voice cutting through the tension like a blade. That's why we see everything. It wasn't just Faith and Hope who died that night. She paused, locking eyes with the stunned crowd. Their unborn sisters died too. For souls, all crying out for justice. The room froze. The gravity of her words sending a ripple of shock through everyone there. If the twins were really connected to the spirits of the dead Whitman kids, even the unborn ones, it changed everything people thought they knew about life after death. Dr. Hayes, the town's unofficial doctor, finally spoke. His voice uneasy. I helped with the burial, he admitted. We knew about the pregnancy, but we told ourselves the babies were too young, that they didn't count, that they didn't have souls yet. Every soul counts. Ezekiel Morrison said firmly, every life matters, no matter how short. But Judge Harrison wasn't here to debate religion. He wanted answers. Mr. Thompson, the judge asked, voice sharp. Are you confessing to the murders of Jacob Whitman, his wife Mary, their twin daughters, and their unborn children? I am, Thompson replied, his words flat and broken. And to the deaths of 11 travelers, Men who trusted us. And we killed them for their money." He hesitated, then added, "It wasn't just me. Samuel Bradford and Marcus Perry were with me. We planned it together. We carried it out together, and we've been hiding it for 16 years. The two old men, named in his confession, sat frozen, their faces drained of color. The crushing weight of their shared guilt had finally broken them. Sheriff Mackenzie stood to arrest them. But Judge Harrison raised a hand to pause him. "Before we go further," the judge said, "I need to know how these children knew any of this. Details that were never written down, never spoken aloud." Rebecca looked up, her unnaturally bright blue eyes steady and unsettling. "Your Honor," she said softly, "some truths. They refuse to stay buried. The Whitman sisters, and their baby sisters, have been waiting 16 years for someone to finally hear them." Sheriff Mackenzie, a no-nonsense guy, more interested in facts than ghost stories, looked straight at the twins. "Can you tell us how many people were killed along these mountain trails?" Rebecca and Rachel traded one of those silent, knowing looks before Rebecca spoke. 11 men over 3 years. Most were traveling alone, carrying money for land or business deals. She said it so casually that a wave of uneasy whispers rippled through the church. Rachel picked it up from there. "They're unsettling. Back and forth as smooth as ever." One of them was a preacher, like Papa, but he had gold coins hidden inside his saddle. The way she said it sent a chill down the room. Sheriff Mackenzie pulled a worn notebook from his coat pocket, flipping through the pages. His face went pale as he found what he was looking for. "Samuel Collins, preacher, disappeared on this trail, September of 1819, he confirmed, his voice tight. "And the horse? A bay mare, with a white star. That's exactly what's recorded." But what happened next shook the whole place to its core. Elder Thompson, frail and shaking, forced himself to stand. "Your Honor," he croaked, his voice breaking under the weight of it all. "I can't carry this secret any longer. The girls, they're telling the truth." His words landed like a blow, silencing the entire church. The wind rattled the boards, a hawk cried somewhere above, and nobody dared to move. "There's more." Thompson confessed, his old face streaked with tears. "Worse than the murders, Jacob Whitman wasn't just some nosy neighbor. He was my brother. I trusted him," Thompson said, his voice cracking. "I thought blood ties would keep him quiet. But Jacob cared more about doing what was right than protecting us." Pastor Phillips felt like the floor was shifting beneath him. As the old man's confession poured out, Jacob threatened to go to Lexington. Thompson continued, looking like the weight of it all might crush him. He wanted the families of those men compensated. He was gonna tell the authorities everything. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "We couldn't let that happen. Too many people depended on Pine Hollow. Depended on what we built here." Thompson's words hung heavy in the air as he kept going, his face pale and shaking. "December 21st, 1818, we followed Jacob and his family to the church. He thought holy ground would protect them." His eyes filled with regret. "But we were desperate and scared." Rebecca, standing nearby, suddenly spoke, her voice low but steady. "Tell them about the babies." The color drained from Thompson's face completely. "Dear God," he choked. How could you possibly know about that?" Judge Harrison leaned forward, his face hard. "What babies? Speak up, Mary Whitman." "She was pregnant," Thompson admitted, like each word physically hurt to say. *8 months along. "With twins," the doctor said. "Maybe they could have lived if we'd gotten help." But his voice broke. Rachel stepped up beside her sister, her quiet voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "That's why we see everything. It wasn't just Faith and Hope who died that night." She paused, locking eyes with the stunned crowd. "Their unborn sisters died too. For souls, all crying out for justice." The room froze, the gravity of her words sending a ripple of shock through everyone there. If the twins were really connected to the spirits of the dead Whitman kids, even the unborn ones, it changed everything people thought they knew about life after death. Dr. Hayes, the town's unofficial doctor, finally spoke, his voice uneasy. "I helped with the burial," he admitted. We knew about the pregnancy. But we told ourselves the babies were too young, that they didn't count, that they didn't have souls yet. Every soul counts. Ezekiel Morrison said firmly, every life matters, no matter how short. But Judge Harrison wasn't here to debate religion. He wanted answers. Mr. Thompson, the judge asked, voice sharp. Are you confessing to the murders of Jacob Whitman, his wife Mary, their twin daughters, and their unborn children? I am, Thompson replied, his words flat and broken. And to the deaths of 11 travelers, men who trusted us, and we killed them for their money. He hesitated, then added, it wasn't just me. Samuel Bradford and Marcus Perry were with me. We planned it together. We carried it out together, and we've been hiding it for 16 years. The 2 old men, named in his confession, sat frozen, their faces drained of color. The crushing weight of their shared guilt had finally broken them. Sheriff Mackenzie stood to arrest them. But Judge Harrison raised a hand to pause him. Before we go further, the judge said, I need to know how these children knew any of this. Details that were never written down, never spoken aloud. Rebecca looked up, her unnaturally bright blue eyes steady and unsettling. Your Honor, she said softly, some truths. They refuse to stay buried. The Whitman sisters, and their baby sisters, have been waiting 16 years for someone to finally hear them. Your Honor, she said softly, her young voice steady, some truths are just too big to stay buried. The Whitman sisters and their baby sisters have waited 16 years for someone to finally listen. But how do you listen to them? Judge Harrison asked, leaning forward. How does this communication happen? Rachel walked up to stand beside Rebecca. We don't know any more than you do. She admitted honestly. We've had these dreams ever since we were little. Dreams about places we've never been, people we've never met. Your father says your mother had second sight. The judge prompted. Rebecca and Rachel shared that strange, silent glance of understanding before Rebecca replied. Mama could feel things about living people. Their emotions, their secrets, but Rachel added, her voice low, we see beyond that. We see the shadows tragedy leaves behind. Especially when innocent blood is spilled. Ezekiel Morrison, watching his daughters, finally spoke up. Your Honor, I've spent years trying to understand them. Ministers, doctors, even professors, no one can explain it. But they've all seen how accurate the girls are. Judge Harrison studied the twins, his sharp gray eyes filled with both curiosity and unease. Rebecca, Rachel, he said, slowly, if what you say is true, then tell us where the other bodies are. The ones that never came home. The question hung in the room like fog. Heavy, impossible to ignore. If the girls could lead them to the missing men, it would be undeniable proof. Rebecca closed her eyes, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Some are buried in the old mineshaft, east of town, she finally said. Others, they were thrown into Devil's Creek, where the water runs deepest. But 3, they're under the church floor. Their bones mixed right into the foundation. Stones. The room froze. A wave of chills ran through the congregation. Pastor Phillips stood frozen, realizing the awful truth. All those sermons, all those prayers, had been spoken right over the hidden graves of murdered men. Sheriff Mackenzie glanced toward Judge Harrison. Your Honor, if we want to prove this, we'll need to tear up the church floor. We will, Judge Harrison replied, his voice hard. But first, I want the whole truth. He turned to Elder Thompson. Where's the money? The valuables? What did you all do with the stolen goods? Thompson's hand shook as he motioned weakly toward the church walls. It's all around us, he admitted. The church, the schoolhouse, the mills, it all came from their money, we told ourselves. If we used it to build something good, maybe God would forgive us. And what about the families? Judge Harrison pressed. The wives, the children. Parents left wondering what happened to their loved ones. It was Rachel who spoke, her soft voice heavy with sadness far beyond her years. Marcus Webb had a wife, Elizabeth, and 2 little boys. Samuel Collins was supposed to get married to a woman named Catherine. But she waited for him until the day she died. She paused, looking at the floor. The others, they all had families. Families that spent years waiting, hoping, never knowing. The strangest part wasn't just the facts they shared, it was how personal it all sounded. The twins didn't just list names or dates, they talked about the murdered men like they had known them, like they carried pieces of their lost hopes, their unfinished lives. Judge Harrison rose from his seat, his voice steady, but his eyes clouded with unease. "This court will recess while we verify the claims made here today," he announced. "Sheriff Mackenzie will oversee the excavation of the church floor, and will search the places the Morrison girls identified. Elder Thompson, Samuel Bradford, and Marcus Perry will remain in custody until formal charges are prepared." The three old men were escorted out in chains, their heads bowed low. The church emptied in uneasy silence, the townspeople still processing the horrifying truth. 16 years of lies, buried deep like the bones beneath their feet, had crumbled apart in a single day. But for Pastor Phillips, one question still echoed louder than all the rest. How could two 9-year-old girls know things no living soul should know? What did it mean for everything they believed about death? About the line between this world and whatever came after? The Morrison twins stood near the altar, looking impossibly small in the vast, quiet church. The weight of what they revealed clung to the air. They looked exhausted, drained from carrying the voices of the dead. "Papa," Rebecca whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "can we go now? It's hard to keep all their voices apart." Ezekiel Morrison pulled his daughters in close, worry lining his face. "Soon," he whispered, "but first, we help these people face what you've shown them." As the midday sun hung over Pine Hollow, its light cutting harsh lines across the cemetery and the churned-up earth behind the church, the town braced for truths they weren't ready for. Truths that would shatter everything they thought they understood about justice, forgiveness, and what comes after death. The excavation of the church floor lasted 3 long days, under Judge Harrison's orders. Sheriff Mackenzie's team pried up the old wooden planks and dug slowly through the packed dirt beneath. What they uncovered sent a chill through everyone watching. 3 full skeletons hidden right beneath the church sanctuary, exactly where the Morrison twins had said, their bones tangled with the stone foundation itself. Scattered among the remains were items that matched the old missing persons reports almost perfectly. A gold ring engraved with the initials JP. It had belonged to Joshua Patterson, the land surveyor who disappeared while mapping the territory. A silver-handled knife, still dulled with age, once carried by William Morse, a merchant whose family had searched for him across 3 states. But it was the third skeleton that made people's blood run cold. Around its neck hung a copper cross, old, tarnished, but unmistakable. The exact cross described by Robert Chen's family, the traveling preacher who vanished while carrying church donation money through these hills. The twins had known. Somehow, impossibly, they had known. As each artifact was logged and examined, the scale of what had happened in Pine Hollow became impossible to deny. This wasn't a single night of violence, it was years of calculated murder and theft. On the 4th day, Judge Harrison stood before the townspeople again. His silver hair looked like it had turned even grayer over the course of the investigation. "The evidence presented here leaves no room for doubt," he announced. "Between 1818 and 1820, 11 men lost their lives on these mountain trails. Their killers took the money they carried and used it to build this town. And when Jacob Whitman discovered the truth, they murdered him and his entire family to keep their secret buried." Elder Thompson, Samuel Bradford, and Marcus Perry stood in chains before the judge, their faces sunken and hollow. The weight of their guilt was carved into every wrinkle. They were old men now, they would never leave a prison cell alive. "Most disturbing part," Judge Harrison continued, "is not just the murders themselves, but how cold, calculated, and organized they were. This wasn't a crime of passion. These men built a system for targeting travelers, taking their lives, and covering it all up, all while claiming to be good, godly men." Pastor Phillips listened, his heart sinking with every word. His church, his faith, The entire community he had given his life to. All of it built on stolen lives and blood money. How could he stand behind the pulpit now, knowing what lay buried beneath his feet? But then Rebecca Morrison's young voice broke through the heavy silence. Judge Harrison. She called, her words ringing out clear and steady. May we talk about forgiveness? The judge looked down at the small girl, his stern face softening with quiet disbelief and a hint of respect after 3 days of watching her impossible knowledge prove true. He had learned to pay attention to everything she said. Of course, child, he replied. What do you want to share? Rebecca and Rachel walked to the front of the church, standing together beneath the wooden cross that had overlooked 16 years of buried secrets. The Whitman sisters want everyone to know they forgive the men who killed them, Rebecca said calmly. They understand that fear can drive people to do terrible things, Rachel added, picking up where her sister left off. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. The men responsible for these crimes still have to face justice, Rebecca continued, and the people here need to make things right for the families they hurt. Judge Harrison nodded, his expression serious. The court agrees. Elder Thompson, Samuel Bradford, and Marcus Perry will stand trial for murder and robbery. But what about this community? He asked. What happens to the church and the buildings paid for with stolen money? Ezekiel Morrison stepped forward, his weathered face thoughtful. Your Honor. Scripture teaches that the sins of the fathers don't have to define the future. If the people here choose to do what's right, if they confess, make amends, and truly change, then Pine Hollow can be redeemed. Pastor Phillips finally found his voice after days of silence. The church itself has to be consecrated again, he said, with quiet determination. We'll remove the remains buried under the floor and give them proper graves, Pastor Phillips continued. We'll do what we can to track down the victims' families and compensate them. And we'll create a memorial so no one ever forgets what happened here. Solicitor Brennan, who had been quietly writing down every word, looked up from his notes. The estate of Marcus Webb alone is owed a lot, he said. His brother has instructed me to seek full repayment of the stolen funds, plus damages. For 16 years of grief, Elder Thompson, still in chains and clearly exhausted, spoke with a weak voice. The money is gone, he admitted, spent over the years on the church, the homes, keeping the community running. There's nothing left. Then the community pays the price, Judge Harrison announced. Every building built with stolen money will be sold. The money will go to the families of the victims. The weight of his words hit the crowd like a punch to the chest. People who had called Pine Hollow home for 16 years would lose everything: their houses, their church, their sense of belonging. Children would be torn from their homes. The elderly forced to leave the only place they'd known for years, a whole generation's sense of security, shattered by the dark choices of those who were supposed to protect them. But it was Rebecca Morrison who delivered the most chilling truth. Judge Harrison, she said, her young voice carrying a weight that didn't belong to a kid her age. There's something else you need to know about Pine Hollow. The room went still. The only sounds, the wind creaking through the old wooden boards, and distant thunder rolling in from the mountains. What do you mean, child? Judge Harrison asked, though it was clear he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Rachel stepped up beside her sister. The mine shaft where they hid some of the bodices, not just a place to cover up old crimes, she said. People are still vanishing along these mountain trails. Sheriff Mackenzie sat up straighter, his expression tense. Are you saying the murders never stopped? Asterisk, not the same people, Rebecca clarified. The original men, most are too old now, but others, they learned how to pick their targets, where to hide the bodies, how to make it all disappear. That knowledge, it didn't die with them. A heavy silence fell over the church as the meaning of her words hit everyone at once. If what the twins were saying was true, Pine Hollow's crimes hadn't ended, they had evolved for years. More innocent people could have been killed, their disappearances blamed on the wilderness or bad luck. Judge Harrison stood, his face set with grim determination. Sheriff Mackenzie, This investigation just got a lot bigger, he said. If there are more recent victims, we're going to find out. As the adults scrambled to respond, the Morrison twins stood side by side, their quiet eyes watching everything. The weight of what they'd revealed finally lifting after 3 long days of dark truths. They had been the voices for the dead, the ones who spoke for those silenced, the ones who couldn't rest until the truth was finally heard. Ezekiel Morrison pulled his daughter's clothes, his face a mix of relief and the quiet worry of a father who knows what's still to come. "You ready to leave this place?" he asked softly. Rebecca's eyes swept over the old church one last time, the weathered wooden walls, the plain cross above, the faces of people forever changed by what she and her sister had revealed. The voices, they're quieter now, she whispered. Faith and hope. They can finally sleep. Rachel nodded, reaching for her sister's hand. But there will be other places, other voices, she said, her words heavy for someone so young. Papa, why do we have to carry all this sadness? Ezekiel crouched to their level, his eyes shining with the tears he tried to hold back. I don't know, little ones, he admitted. But I believe God only gives hard things to those strong enough to handle them. Maybe your gift. Maybe it's meant for something bigger than we understand. As the Morrison family got ready to leave Pine Hollow, their strange gift and the terrible truths they uncovered would go with them. Pastor Phillips stood watching, his mind spinning with doubt. Could he really stay and help rebuild after what had been exposed? Or should he run from this place, poisoned by secrets and violence? But then he saw the twins, hand in hand, walking toward their father. If 2 kids could carry the weight of all that darkness with grace and still speak of forgiveness, maybe there was hope. Even here, 3 weeks later, Pine Hollow was nothing but empty buildings and memories. The church was taken apart piece by piece, its wood sold off to help pay back the families of the murdered. The people of Pine Hollow had scattered, drifting to other towns across Kentucky and Tennessee, carrying the weight of a truth no one wanted to face, that everything they'd built stood on the graves of the innocent. But far beyond those hills, a new story started to spread. Whispers in quiet churches and around campfires, the tale of 2 young girls with knowledge no one could explain. Girls who spoke for the dead, who delivered justice that had been buried for years. Some folks called it backwoods superstition. Others believed it was God stepping in when humans failed to do the right thing. The Morrison family kept traveling through the isolated churches tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains, and wherever they went, strange things followed. Communities finding a sense of peace after years of secrets, old crimes exposed, puzzles solved thanks to twin girls who spoke with the confidence of preachers, even though they were just kids. Judge Harrison's final report on what happened in Pine Hollow filled 47 pages, covering crimes that stretched across 20 brutal years. His last words would be quoted in law schools for generations. This case shakes the core of what we think we know about truth, justice, and what waits beyond death. Science may never explain how the Morrison girls knew what they did, but their words were real. Their knowledge, undeniable. Maybe some truths just refused to stay buried. Pastor Phillips eventually started fresh, building a new church in eastern Tennessee. He dedicated his life to helping towns face their darkest secrets and find honest redemption. But he never forgot those 3 days in Pine Hollow, when 2 little girls tore apart 16 years of lies with knowledge no living person should have carried. No one ever really figured out how Rebecca and Rachel Morrison could do what they did. The doctors back then had no way to explain how 2 kids knew things no one else could. Even church leaders couldn't agree were their abilities a blessing, or something way more complicated. One thing wasn't up for debate though: information was dead on. Every single detail they shared about the Pine Hollow murders turned out to be true. Every hidden spot they described, the evidence was exactly where they said it would be. Every dark secret they exposed, verified by people who had no reason to lie. But maybe the scariest part of their story isn't about the past. It's what they hinted about justice itself. What if the dead really can't rest when their killers get away with it? What if innocence has some power that reaches beyond the grave to demand consequences? Maybe right and wrong don't stop when life does. Sometime in the 1840s, the Morrison twins basically disappeared from history. No one knows for sure what happened. Some believe they stuck with their dad's traveling ministry until they died, helping other towns face their hidden sins. Others think they figured out how to turn off whatever made them different, and just lived normal lives, far from the gossip and ghost stories. But out in the Appalachian Mountains, in those tiny, tucked-away towns where secrets still rot and old crimes stay buried, people say the twins still show up. Two girls with matching faces. Girls who talk about the dead like they knew them. Girls who know the truth about things no one's talked about for decades, and they remind the guilty of one simple, terrifying fact. Some justice doesn't care about laws. It never stays buried. Whether those sightings are really the Morrison twins, some spiritual version of them, or something completely different, nobody really knows. Science can't explain it. Faith doesn't have all the answers either, but one thing's for sure, Ruth is like energy. It doesn't disappear, it just changes form, moves around, shows up when you least expect it, and sometimes it finds people brave enough to speak for those who can't speak for themselves anymore. The records from the Pine Hollow case are still stored away in the Kentucky State Archives. If you're curious or brave enough, you can go dig through the old files. Judge Harrison's reports, the sheriff's case files, even Pastor Philip's journals, they all back up the same crazy story. But the big question, how did two 9-year-old girls know things no one else possibly could? How did they speak for the dead? Nobody has solved that part. Not then, not now. Some mysteries are just stuck in that weird place between what we believe and what we can actually prove, a space where science runs out of answers and faith leaves you guessing. Asterisk, what do you think? Did the Morrison twins really talk to the spirits of murder victims? Or was it something else, some natural ability we just haven't figured out yet? The facts, yeah, those check out. But the truth behind it, that's still one of history's creepiest, most unsolved mysteries. Asterisk, asterisk. What's your take on the Morrison twins? Drop your theory in the comments. Do you think it's possible that death isn't really the end? That somehow, part of us stays behind, watching, remembering, or maybe you believe there's a totally normal, scientific reason behind their creepy knowledge, one we just haven't discovered yet. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more stories that mess with everything we think we know about reality, and tap the notification bell so you never miss the weirdest, wildest tales like this one. Until next time, remember, some secrets don't stay buried, and sometimes it's the quietest voices that reveal the darkest truths.